Facebook Live Lunch and Learn. So National Voter Registration Day took place on Tuesday, and CAA Health, along with many other community-based organizations, joined in a concerted effort to share resources and encourage everyone to register to vote in preparation for the 2020 election. Please don't wait until the last minute and assume that you're registered. Verify your status today. You can do so by visiting the Colorado Secretary of State's voter information page at sos.state.co.us. The Center for Afro-American Health also wants to lift every voice up this election. So we're hosting a drive-through voter registration tomorrow in the parking lot of our building located at 3350 Hudson Street, Denver, Colorado. And that will be between 9 and 1. We will also be doing this again on Saturday, October 10th. So as we wait for a few people to join, I'll go ahead and introduce myself and tell you a bit more about the Center for African American Health. Again, my name is Deidre Johnson, and I am the CEO and Executive Director. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the work of the Center for African American Health, we have been in the community for more than 20 years with a focus and commitment to improving the health and well-being of the African American community, working throughout Northeast Denver and neighborhoods. As we move through today's session, please feel free to type your questions in the comment area and we'll address them if time permits. You know, last week at our Lunch and Learn, we discussed the fact that communities of color have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And throughout the year, we've engaged in ongoing discussions about the legacy of racial injustice in this country and how that burden negatively affects our physical and mental well-being. To say this year has been tough would be an understatement. However, throughout it all, people of color remain resilient, innovative, and resourceful. Throughout history, we've overcome adversity and continue to do so in spite of the status quo. Today, we're here to explore some of the ways in which we can begin to repair, strengthen, and positively impact our communities. My guest, Anietie Ekanem, has made a career of fostering positive change initiatives, many within the area of economic development, by empowering grassroots community organizations. Welcome, Anietie. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. This is incredible. And I just love talking to you. Always have a great time.
I know. I think it was about a year ago that we met at the Colorado Impact Conference. Mm-hmm. And, you know, typical scenario, great information. You look across the room and find the other Black person.
Yeah.
And we just have stayed in contact. And the reason I love talking to you is that I always leave kind of energized and refreshed to go back, roll up my sleeves, and keep moving.
Yep. And I absolutely feel the same way. Even at that meeting, hearing so much more about what you do and the work that you do for our people right there on the ground in Colorado, it's just amazing. And we just need more of that. A lot of what I do in my work is take a look at mission-driven firms, social impact projects, and really see how I can amplify the impact. And so it's my honor to sort of work with you and have fun with you in the process to help you amplify the impact of everything that you do.
Oh, thank you so much. So I've been looking forward to this conversation. I have to admit, today it feels even more timely given yesterday's, I'll call it a verdict. That's all I can do. Regarding the murder of Breonna Taylor. I will share that the Center for African American Health has crisis counselors on staff. If anyone needs support, please call 720-923-7250 if you would like to meet with one of our counselors. And we're blessed to have additional funding, and we're going to be hiring additional counselors if that is your calling. So you can check our website in the coming days for those job postings. You know, before we go into some questions we had already discussed, how are you doing?
Honestly, yesterday, I just felt it. And I think we all did. This was another sort of decision that sort of came down and we wanted justice for this young woman. And from what happened, it did not happen. And it just weighed heavily on my heart. And I remember, so yesterday I had all this great stuff to do, all this work that I actually really wanted to get done. I was really excited about it. And then I heard this verdict, and then I just had to go inside. But that for me is just the first step, because it's really important to acknowledge that right? Not to blow through it, because I think as African Americans, one of the things we always do, we always put our head down, we just move forward, and we don't do our self-reflection and self-care as part of the process. So at some point, something breaks. And so, you know, definitely encourage people to sort of take that moment and just go, oh my God, this is what's going on. You know, if they need to, call you, right? Because I think that's an amazing resource. But then, you know, like we always do, we need to keep going. So using this, and, you know, you and I were talking, and a few others, using this to say, we need to vote. We need to actually change the structures that are in place, right? Use this as a way to fuel, because that's exactly what I'm doing. So it was hard, and will continue to be hard. We know this. This is not new for us. I think what someone once said is like, this isn't new, it's just being recorded, right?
Exactly.
It's being distributed. Now, given that, you know, now I think it's up to you, the people who are watching, myself, and, you know, our friends to really sort of step in ways we didn't know how to before. And one of the first ones is to vote en masse, right? Like, we need to come out in such an extent, as Michelle Obama, you know, pretty much alluded to, you know, they're going to cheat. So we need to step up in such numbers that they come back and say, we can't manipulate this, right? And that's that verdict, and the sadness that I feel helps me double down on that belief even further, and some of the other things that we will be talking about today.
Thank you for that. I have to agree. I've been kind of weaning myself from social media deliberately these days.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out about it actually when you texted, because you were saying something in verdict. I'm like, oh my goodness, let me go look. And, you know, kept going through my day, slept horribly. And I've had some impromptu discussions with folks from different organizations. And it all has been, what can we do? How can we support our employees? How can we support community? So I do love that we're all rallied to, like, what can we do next? But that other piece is, how can we take care of ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
Because this has been going on for generations. It's not going to stop immediately, but we want it to stop. And we have to make sure we can keep moving forward.
And
So,
for me,
ahead.
just, I think for me, it's also, this is part of a marathon race, right? It's a marathon race to freedom. And I want everyone along this path to be there with us. And in order for that to happen, we need to take care of ourselves, right? We need to take care of our mental health. We need to take just a moment to slow down if we need to, if we choose to, because I want all of us to literally just keep going lockstep, like, with one another, right? Because this is not going to be the last, unfortunately, but we will get there. And I think taking care of ourselves, working with you, working with the Center for African American Health is key to doing that work.
And we will get there.
Yep.
So please tell our viewers more about your background and the objective of your organization, Inspired Social Impact.
Yes. It's so interesting. I love, because I was in this conversation just actually a couple days ago. So why do you do what you do? And at the end of the day, I truly and absolutely love to help communities amplify their positive impact. My personal mission in life is to help people in communities realize their full potential and manifest extraordinary success. Years ago, when that came to me, it was a how dare I moment. How dare I act that big? How dare I sort of step into this? And literally since then, everything I've done has been around, look, how can I actually help others and bring us together, bring us forward in ways that we probably didn't even think of before. So this, one thing that we're doing around Inspired Social Impact is really creating a network of leaders, right? Like yourself, myself, and others who can come together and network around our common goals and really sort of push our work forward. Because a Stanford study showed there are 3 factors why Black and Brown executives don't get as much money. And one of the first ones is we're not invited to the table, right? We don't network, we don't share to the extent that we need to. So that's been critically important with some of the work that I'm doing as part of that organization. With another, called Amplified Impact. Really, it's a consulting firm, and really what we're doing is working with a number of different firms to sort of go, hey, what can we do to make sure that your impact is actually community-centered, right? And what does that mean? And it's really interesting because when we start to unpack that, right, we're finding very interesting things that we'll definitely sort of get into. And I think a huge part of that, it really sort of speaks to power. And what does it mean to be powerful in community? What does it mean to actually have community really not only have ownership, but also build the metrics and the systems necessary, the skill sets internally, to actually ensure the success of the things that are there.
So I ran across an article published in the Denver Post a few months ago, affirming that Denver saw more widespread gentrification than any other city in the US, aside from where you're joining us from today, San Francisco. Low and moderate income families are facing displacement at an alarming rate. That further complicates the economic hardships and staying safe in this pandemic. Tell us about how this story parallels what you've witnessed in San Francisco.
Oh, San Francisco went from 17 to 13% African-American to somewhere around 3 to 4% today. A huge part of that, it has to do with our housing policy, a huge part of it. We didn't know, right? We didn't know what we didn't know. We weren't sort of politically savvy. There are other groups who came in and just decimated communities, right? So there are absolute stories around redlining. There are absolute stories around how they literally busted up Black communities. The Fillmore is one. It was a thriving Black community, sort of alluded to as the Harlem of the West, and they literally decimated it, scattered people to the four winds, did not care, came in and rebuilt, lied to the people in the process. And so we've seen that happen over and over again in different forms. Most recently, we've seen with the housing sort of boom, like that's happened with these sort of astronomical sort of rents. You know, when I first moved to the city, paying $1,200 for a studio, I thought was just insane. You know, now it's up to $3,000, $4,000, sometimes $5,000 for that same space.
Wow.
Right. If you're lucky, maybe a one bedroom, but still, that's a huge amount of money. And the, you know, median income of a white family in San Francisco and the Bay Area is somewhere around $120,000 or so. For comparable income for Black folks is at 11. Like there's a major difference in actual wealth. Like that's happened. So we've had housing policies. We've had this sort of increase in rents, even in neighborhoods that people would not have even thought about going into before, right? That's actually forced our own folks out. We've sort of taken a look at, you know, even our elders who have been there, right? In where we are, it's one of the actual largest levels of home ownership in the city of San Francisco, but it's very interesting. What happens then, people become underemployed, right? Mm-hmm. They actually can't afford their homes. So they're actually forced to leave. And while they actually might get a good amount of money, they leave San Francisco. They go back to their ancestral roots, whether that's Texas or somewhere else in the South or sort of central. So we've seen this big shift of people out of the city for all the reasons like that I talked about. And it's sad and it's hard, but we're actually trying to make some real strides about how we can actually not only arrest that, but bring people back.
So how do individuals who are passionate about preserving their neighborhood and living within an area of economic development take action to combat the issues of displacement and gentrification?
Yeah, this is a hard one. You know, there is no one size fits all necessarily, but I definitely sort of want to share the blueprint that we've sort of seen is working. One, we had to get really, really politically savvy, right? And not only talking to our supervisor and all those people, but we need to know the planning laws that are sort of going on. We needed to actually get really tight and really understand, like the planning aspects of our city, the zoning and things like that. So that's one, it's this almost education piece. Next, what we actually decided to do is we actually came together and said, hey, there are tools that can be used. And one of them that we actually spent a few years doing as a community, and when I say community, several hundreds of people coming together, is that we designated a part of San Francisco, in this case, the Bayview, which was the historically Black part of town, as the San Francisco African-American Cultural District, right? It took a very long time to do that. But what that enabled us to do, and is enabling us to do right now, is we have a geographic area that's actually designated for our culture and what that means. And now the next step is we're literally taking a look at legislation that we need to put in place and fund, by the way. So it's not only, hey, this is great to have, but you put the legislation in place, and it's just around the cultural district, making sure that our legacy Black businesses can survive, making sure that our history is there. So, for example, where we live, and I didn't know this until I got into the process, of course we have street names. I had no idea that each one of those street names was associated with a really important person, whether they were Black, brown, Chinese, etc., in our community, right? So literally it's everything from preserving that, making sure that there's more education in our own communities about that, talking about businesses and what that means, right? All part of this sort of package of people sort of bringing together. And there were a few others before us, right? There was the Japanese Cultural District in San Francisco. There's a trans cultural district. There is a leather cultural district, in addition to the Black or African-American cultural district. So this has been a sort of a policy thing that we've been able to sort of hang our hats on. The next step was, hey, now that we have this in place, what funding needs to come in to sort of help us out? And then how do we centralize that? Because one of the things that we saw was there's money coming in from a bunch of different places, but no one's tracking it, right? When things aren't tracked, progress isn't made. So one of the other things that we said is, hey, let's bring this money together. Let's have these conversations, right? We don't necessarily want to stop you from giving in the neighborhood, but we are going to know about it. Right? We are going to track that sort of moving forward. And that's been critically important. And then lastly, we're sort of taking a look at art and all that art means, right? And being able to fund them in a real consistent basis through city fundings, whether that's going to be through general funds or others. So it's been like this stacking, people coming together and saying, hey, we've tried all these other ways, right? We've talked to our supervisor, we've sort of had different community groups, and we're still seeing this negative trend. We're going to try something different. It was a cultural district. We got that passed, really sort of focused in on culture. Now the next piece was planning and funding. What does that look like? So that's just one of the tools that we've used sort of so far. And there are a few others that I'd love to sort of share with you.
That's fantastic. So we often hear the term grassroots movement to describe the process of people organizing themselves to improve various aspects of social or economic well-being. What does it look like when we center impact in community?
I think it's powerful ultimately, but it ain't easy to get there, both internally and externally. Let's just be really clear about that. I'd love to give you an example here. One of the projects that we're working on is called the Bayview Food Co-op. Actually, the Bayview Community Co-op. It's a healthy food co-op that really was born out of necessity. We are a food desert, right? In our area, there are 35,000 people, and there's a dearth of healthy food going in. And then on top of all that, the city poured in millions of dollars to try to entice, whether it's Trader Joe's or some of these other places to come in. They didn't. We got one in, and they weren't culturally sensitive or culturally aware, right? It wasn't only that, they were in a whole different part of San Francisco, right, where they had a huge amount of foot traffic, and they kind of moved to the suburbs and didn't know how to market to that, right? And so the fresh food that they brought is now gone. And then we had a few Walgreens stores, and then one closed, the other one were threatening to close. And we're just like, what the hell's going on? We've seen this cycle happen over and over and over again. And so what we decided to do is say, no, we need to own healthy food, right, in our own neighborhoods. We need to do this. And so we were taking a look at what ownership means, and we were like, no, the cooperative model is really important to us. So us owning our own, and it's really interesting actually going back and tying it back to, and different cultures have this, but definitely sort of on the African side, this is a huge piece of like how people sort of came together. So through this, we're also sort of rediscovering our own sort of historical roots, so to speak, which is actually really nice. And so we began talking about the co-op. What does it look to actually provide healthy food? So a few things that we decided from the very beginning, we want to actually source from Black and brown farmers, right? Very difficult thing to do, right? I've been in many a discussion. Where are they? So one, just identifying them, right? Because when we take a look at the complete value chain, I want to actually recycle our dollar all the way through. So really, it's about community ownership. It's about, community buying from its own and understanding what that means. When we're taking a look also at this sort of community piece, we've done a lot of talking, right? So we have these different tiers of ownership too. One of the most important things that we found, where it's, going back to the gentrification issue, people have either moved out or been forced out, but they have roots in the community. So we were talking to them, they were like, oh, you're creating a what? I remember when the ground was broken on like the Kennedy store or this other shop or whatever else. I want in. So part of what we sort of saw was, oh my God, it's not only the people who are here, but we also created a legacy tier, right? So the people who were gentrified out, who want to actually come back and invest back in, they can do that too. So it's just been extremely amazing as just as one example of sort of community-centered ownership. Another one has to do with health. We have gone ahead because, as you can imagine, places of color, we also have the most infrastructure in the city of San Francisco. So the water, power, and sewer plants, PG&E plant that was shut down. It goes on and on, but that also means that there have been really bad health consequences. So one of the things that community has done is said, hey, we actually want to go in and put air monitoring stations in throughout our community to monitor the actual air quality of all these things that are going in. And a key piece to that is, one, the community also has to own the data, because data is used consistently and constantly by other people on the outside to justify their policy decisions. And so one of the things that we sort of said as a sort of community-centered impact, oh no, the community owns this. You want our data, you have to come to us, you have to explain. But oh, by the way, we are now savvy enough to start using this data for our own policy decisions. And what we're finding is that when we married lived experience with real analytics and real data, it gives people no way to escape. Because we've all been part of that, right? You go to a meeting, oh, we need to form a committee, or we need more data, or we need a study. Let's get a study of the study of the study, because I'm just not sure what I want to do. And now we're at a point where it's like, no, sorry. And it's really interesting what has sort of happened too. I think it's, and even when I talk about it, it's a shift in the way in which we sort of move back and forth. Because before I get between you, me, and the people who are watching, get really pissed. Just honestly, how can you actually take this negative policy-like decision, right? How can you not fund local programs? How can you not, fund programs for, kids to eat locally and in our own district? Or how can you not fund seniors to actually remain here and actually, ostensibly become homeless? Really aggravating. But now, because we have the lived experience and the data around this example and others, we actually now walk in lockstep. We're going, you don't get to escape from this now. We are now going to have this conversation. It's going to be a very uncomfortable one for you. And we sort of acknowledge that. And look, we're also in a place where people are willing to listen, at least a good number of them. But I do work in other places where people aren't, right? And still this whole idea of being able to have a lived experience married with data that community owns, that's not manipulated for someone else's policy, is actually still extremely important.
Well, that's why I'm so excited about where the center is at this moment. Because one of the first things we did when I joined the team is start our own community health panel called Be Heard Mile High. And that really was the initial first step. How can we start harvesting our own data that we own and protect
Yes.
and can share? And the most recent piece is we just got funding from the Colorado Health Foundation. So we're about to hire a community organizer and a policy director. So we'll be able to go from community informed and led to this is what we want to lead on. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and what I've told folks is that it's not that we don't want to partner, we'll continue to partner, but there's some issues we just simply have to lead on. And I think that it's funny, I don't want to date myself, but I feel like I've been at this for about 20 years and we are still looking at the same problems that we were noodling and settling 20 years ago. That really only happens when people don't want to do what they need to do. And I'm like you, I have a moment where I get upset, but then ultimately my realist kicks in. If someone's not doing this, either they haven't had the opportunity to do it or they just don't care. So if they just don't care, let them declare that so we can move on. Yes. Because I think at the end of the day, when you start peeling away the makeup, despite whatever taglines people use or health equity slogan, you know what their values are, but where they're investing.
Yes. Budgets are moral documents.
Yes.
That's exactly what that is. And I absolutely, completely agree with that. And it's really interesting because one of the other things, and I love the fact that you are taking a stand and leading, but I also know you, right? You're leading and you still want to collaborate, right? Where it's appropriate. And I think that's really, one of the shifts for our current leadership, in general, because look, I love to collaborate. When I go and talk to different activists and, we want to collaborate, right? But sometimes it's extremely important to lead, especially when you have the right mindset and the right tools, because you can now then not only define the game, but just like you said, and I think you said it so well, allow people to declare what they really believe, right? So that you are not wasting your time, exactly. Because your time is the most precious thing. As a community person, we have our families and everything else, right? These institutions have been doing this type of thing for decades. Some would say over 450 years, So from an institutional perspective, that history is really long. And so partnering with you as you lead, I think is going to actually be a game changer in a lot of different areas.
So we've got a few questions that have come in. The first is, what are some overlooked things that every Black community member can do to support the building of Black-owned assets and industry?
That's a great one. So there are a few things that we're sort of going through right now. I am running a project called onebayview.com, and what we've done thus far, we've actually done really simple things. One was actually gather a newsletter of everything that's happening in the community, right? Because one of the things that we realized is I know what happens within a block of my home. A block in 1 inch, I have no idea, right? And our communities are huge. And people put in a lot of time and energy into all these different things. So literally we went really basic when we started, and we put out a newsletter summarizing everything that's sort of going on, right? Our email list is huge. Why? Because people are going, I had no idea. I was literally walking. So last year when we could do this, I was actually talking to someone who I didn't know. And she was like, oh, I get this newsletter. And our kids, we actually did a Halloween thing we didn't even know was going on, right? And it was like, we don't even know how we got it, but we did, and we just loved it. So I think really basically is that communication. So one is that communication. Two, really taking a look who in your neighborhood is doing what. So one of the things for us is we took an inventory, and we have a huge number of sort of mid and large sort of warehouse type businesses. And so what we're doing is we're actually matching them, right? Because they have needs, with potential local vendors. Again, trying to keep that in the family. And it's really interesting. People don't know one another, right? And so I was walking down the street once. I decided to go into the shop, never been in there before. Guy was there for 30 years, right? He was like a plumber. I was like, oh, would love to like know more. He's like, oh, I only deal with large businesses. Well, I live in an HOA, and we just literally went out and sourced from someone else. Of course, we would have loved to have come to you. So finding those vendors who are local and trying to actually connect them together is actually so critical. Lastly, something that we've done is literally just get a Google form together, right? Send it to all of your friends. And the Google form is all about identifying all the Black businesses that are here and categorizing them. It's amazing how we don't know that, right? Like I didn't know like 3/4 of the businesses that were on that list. So events, walking down, getting like to know different types of vendors and sort of seeing if you can make that connection. And lastly, getting that list and going really simple Google form and identifying all the Black sort of businesses in your neighborhood and start sharing that.
That's a fantastic idea. Another question. What words of encouragement do you have for those in our community who may feel discouraged by the slow or lack in progress to build strong Black communities through group economics and asset control management?
Oh, that is good.
These are the good ones.
Yeah, I mean, actually, you know what? It's being on the other side. There are a couple of things. I think one, being completely selfish. Find a few other people of like mind that you can like talk to on a consistent basis, right? So going back to where we started, sometimes it is discouraging, and you just need. I have my group, and sometimes I just need to talk to them, right? Talk to them for real about what's really going on. So I think that is absolutely one thing. Again, sort of that mental health piece. Two, when you are identifying like these businesses that you actually want to work with, go and meet with them. They have stories, right? They're going to be a couple that you really love. And I think that third piece is really aligning it with what you want personally. Because sometimes we get into this whole thing around the things that we should do. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we have to actually bring it back to, this is actually what I need, right? So if you were a single mom who needs X, Y, or Z, find that X, Y, and Z in your neighborhood, right? Or in your community, and really champion that, right? Because you're going to find, oh, there are other, moms or parents, whatever, who might want that same thing. And I'm just using parents as just one example of something that could happen.
And then you accomplish it, celebrate it, and do the next thing.
Absolutely. And it's sort of piecemeal, right? And I think sometimes because this has been going on for so long, because of the gravity of the situation, we want to get to that finish line really quickly. And I think actually piecemealing it out into these smaller chunks, and just like you said, celebrating along the way is critical to where we need to be.
Here's another one. Have you heard about the letter from the White House that they are mandating be included in all food boxes being provided to families? The letter is about the latest government coronavirus guidelines.
I have not heard that. I have not seen that as guidance from our own Department of Public Health. So I can't necessarily speak to that. I do know that one of the things that we're doing is that we are providing what we believe are really great guidelines. And they're actually a lot stricter than what we're sort of been hearing recently, because we're dying. Hello. I'm done. I'm done like listening to people give me shoddy suggestions. So we as a community, and when I say we as a community, our Black doctors or nurses, community members, we come together and said, hey, what do we really need to do? And so we've actually come together with a list that we've actually put into our food distribution and a number of other places, because we want people to be here, especially our elders. I've talked to elders. I'm like, sometimes it's, it's a little difficult. I'm like, we need you to wear a mask. We're like, if God takes me, God takes me. Like, Yes, that is always true. But your story is something that people need to hear. And if you're not here, who else is going to tell it? Right? I mean, it's just, it's us connecting to one another, right? Because I personally want people to be around for that finish line, or as far along that path as possible.
So another thing I want to ask you about, I find it's interesting because so many people, and it makes sense, it's hard for them to imagine something they've never seen.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, working in this nonprofit industrial complex.
Yep.
There's money, there's power. That's why I always refuse to fight over crumbs, because coming together, we can do so much more. But in the past, you've mentioned a community with veto power. Yes. What does that mean, and what might that look like?
Yes. So I'm going to give you 2 examples around that. I'm working on a major community project with our transportation agency. And one of the critical things, because I'm such, a community-centered impact person, is that community needs to have veto power, right? And so what that means is literally the big decisions, right? They can get formulated by all of us sort of together, so to speak, but then we literally have a group of community folks who get to have veto power over the agency's program itself, which means it doesn't get implemented. Now, in that process, here's what we're saying. Yes, we totally understand that you have a lot of education and learning in this particular sort of, vertical. Absolutely get that, right? I can't just, have random folks sort of do what you do because you have a lot of experience. However, when it comes to the impact that it needs to have on the community itself, the community gets to define what that impact is. It's defined by the community, not by the individual agency or the corporation's ROI models. That's not the way that works. And then on the other side, it's when these policies or these programs are put in place, or when they're on the way to being put in place, that community, we call it a community council, right? Must hear it. And the community council, it isn't just, oh, we get to ask you questions. It doesn't go forward without our say so. When you have real power vested in the community like that, what we're seeing is people go, like, literally stepping back on, oh, this is different, right? This is not us sort of doing a dog and pony show. You can stop us in our tracks. And for me, that's been such a powerful thing, right? Because now it's really forcing people to say, oh, we can't just create this RFP by ourselves and present it to everyone as if it's the best thing on the planet, right? They will go, no. Instead, it's, oh, our RFP creation process actually have to start with you guys. Oh, that's interesting. We've never done that before. Yeah, we know, but we've been telling you that for decades now. So now it's happening, because on that back end, again, community gets a go, no, stop. You don't even get to move forward like with this.
Well, we went over a bit, but I knew we would, and I didn't mind. I was actually planning on it. First of all, I want to thank you for what you do every day. There was a couple of months, I can't remember, it was right when COVID started. You invited me to a call, and it was Black leaders from several cities. And not only was it interesting, but when I got off, how that fed my soul, I can't even explain it. It was just so invigorating to talk to other folks with the same concerns and hopes for their communities. So thank you, because you were the driver of that.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad you could join us today. Again, we're out of time, but thank you for joining us. This video will be available along with other information on the center's website at caahealth.org. Thank you all for tuning in. Take care. And do call our counselors if we can be of service, because we're here for you.